But at this dealership lot, they are currently in a lawsuit with Stellantis because they're trying to give up their franchise. Yeah, because they have like 2,600 vehicles there they don't want anymore. And
at this point in time, Stellantis doesn't want them, especially the 22s and 23s.
7 or 8 more rows to the right of this, and they're just absolutely stacked everywhere. And I'll show you another picture of another dealer lot. So, Ray, we have the situation in the car market where, okay, a lot of these auto manufacturers have been buoyed by their fleet sales, and now we're seeing fleet sales start to tick down a little bit. And one thing that I always thought was going to happen is you're going to have this big accordion effect where, okay, we went through a couple years of no production, so these companies were able to figure out that they can make their fleets last a little bit longer. And then when we got production coming back in where we had fleet vehicles available, then all these companies bought at one time. And this is why the fleet industry has been so strong over the last couple of years. And now if we start seeing this plateau and this tick down of fleets, is it because, okay, all the companies that were going to buy, load up their fleets, they bought, and now we have to wait this 2 to 3 to 4 years before they start buying again? Is it going to be a big headwind now for these manufacturers because they're not able to really put their stake in a lot of these fleet sales? Is it going to be a big problem for these manufacturers going forward?
I will tell you this. We had a commenter on one of our live broadcasts when we were talking about fleet sales. And the gentleman said, the fleet company that he works for, and they have a 500 plus vehicle fleet. They were normally replacing those vehicles 4 to 5 years old. They now keep them like 8 years. Rather than replace the cars, they're replacing transmissions and engines as needed because it's still cheaper than replacing the entire vehicle. So what a lot of fleets have learned is that through proper maintenance, they can hold on to these vehicles, and the life expectancy of these vehicles can be prolonged, so that instead of having to replace vehicles every 4 to 5 years, they can now look at replacing them every 7 to 8 years. So certainly if fleets are going to hold on to their vehicles almost twice as long, that's going to impact the number of fleet sales that manufacturers are going to be able to count on every year. And when you talk fleet, most people just think, okay, it's rental car companies. It's not just rental car companies. It's utility companies. It's big businesses with a lot of vehicles. It's governments, and let's face it, people don't want to pay taxes. Tax dollars are going down. So if governments have less to spend, then they can't replace their fleet vehicles as often as they would have in the past. So it's when you think fleet, don't just think Hertz and Budget and Avis. Think of your huge utilities. Think of mining companies. I mean, it's just the number of fleet customers, fleet vehicles out there is astronomical.
Well, what I think about going to these dealerships now, and I see a lot of the fleet lots, is that like a lot of work trucks, a lot of like white plain work trucks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of these companies have to keep a lot of these, especially trucks, longer out of necessity. Like the cheapest, I mean, you think the Ram 1500 Classic, that's the work truck that Stellantis was offering fleet. You think a low-level XL F-150, both of these trucks right now are $50,000 to $55,000. You go back to 2019, those same trucks were probably between $30,000 and $35,000. So the problem with that is, I mean, that, transmission is going to be way cheaper. A motor is going to be way cheaper to replace in a lot of these trucks, even though these trucks are going to be down sometime, or they're just going to keep beating them until they fall apart, because it just doesn't make sense for them to keep reloading with a truck that's 30-40% higher than what they were paying for their previous fleet when they can just keep running them longer. And I think this is going to be a problem for a lot of these manufacturers going forward, at least, because these companies are now, wise to it. They now realize that instead of running these fleets for 4 years, they can now run them for 8 years and get double the amount of time out of them. And in a lot of cases, they probably don't have to replace the transmission. They probably don't have to replace the motor. They can just run them, and then they can get rid of them at the end of that and save a whole bunch of money.
Yeah, what they'll need to invest their money in is in good mechanics. And if we think in the automobile industry today, especially in retail dealerships, if we think there's a mechanic shortage now, well, it's only going to get worse, especially if these huge fleet companies are holding on to their vehicles longer. They're going to, rather than buy vehicles, they're going to have to acquire more techs to work on their vehicles. So there could be a shifting of what we normally see in the industry, or what the industry has looked like in the past. I think with the advent of the new administration, there could be a huge shift. I mean, during the Biden administration, government fleets were supposed to, at some point, become all electric. Well, under a Trump administration, I can guarantee you it ain't going to be all electric. So manufacturers are going to look at things differently now than what they had been. In the past, they were planning for this huge electric future. And I think now they're probably looking at a reprieve of that and saying to themselves, it's probably going to take longer to get to that EV nirvana that everybody was looking for than what we had thought it was going to be initially. I would not be surprised to see the lowering of gas mileage requirements once the new administration takes effect, so that you can just see where this push to EVs, which will impact fleets as well, this push to EVs will slow down to a huge degree. It might only leave 1 or 2 or 3 real EV players in the market. I'm pretty sure we can guess who they might be.
Yeah. So I want to show you. We're talking about what fleets look like, and a lot of people might not know. But this is some of the this is one of the lots. I take these pictures when I go to these lots to make thumbnails for our videos. So this is one of them right here. I mean, you see this whole row of Ram 1500s. These are all the classics, and then you have a whole row on this side. But what you're not seeing is that there's about 7 or 8 more rows to the right of this, and they're just absolutely stacked everywhere. And I'll show you another picture of another dealer lot. This is one I go to quite a bit to film too. But at this dealership lot, they are currently in a lawsuit with Stellantis because they're trying to give up their franchise. Yeah, because they have like 2,600 vehicles they don't want anymore. And in North Carolina, you can give up your franchise, and then the actual manufacturer is supposed to have to take the vehicles back. But here's the thing: they're getting sued, and I don't know technology. There we go. But they're getting sued by Stellantis because they were. I mean, it looked like they were buying cars from other dealerships. They were getting vehicles from other places other than Stellantis. They weren't advertising like they were supposed to. It's just all a big. It's going to be a headache for both sides, but it's so bad for this dealership situation. And all of those Rams that I just showed you on that screen, they were marked down like $18,000 to $20,000, and they were still sitting there.
Well, somebody should come along and buy some of them, because at $18,000 to $20,000 off, that probably represents a good opportunity.
Well, they were. I think they were. I can't remember if they were 2022s or 2023s.
Okay, so maybe it has to be $25,000, but.
All right, well, a lot of you might not realize this, but this is a brand new channel, so make sure you hit that subscribe button, like, and let us know what you want us to talk about.
Yeah, this was a dealer allegedly that used fleet numbers because these fleet purchasers are are given a number by the manufacturer so that when dealers order the cars, they can order them for that particular customer. And allegedly, according to the lawsuits going back and forth, this dealer used specific fleet purchasers' numbers to acquire some of these vehicles, which would indicate to Stellantis when they're building the vehicles, well, that they're sold. So you can't take them, bring them on your lot with the manufacturer believing they're pre-sold when they built them, and then just leave them there for stock and say, okay, well, we want to give up the franchise and we want you to take these, what you thought were pre-sold vehicles, back. It's going to get ugly because if I'm not mistaken, it represents about $150 million worth of inventory. And that's a lot of inventory that at this point in time, Stellantis doesn't want them, especially the 22s and 23s. So I don't know what the outcome of those lawsuits will be, but it should send a signal to other dealers who try to operate like this. Really maybe have your house in order and don't order fleet vehicles that aren't pre-sold.
And I'm not positive on this, but all of these are white. They were very bland trucks, but this was on their frontline retail lot. So they didn't have them in fleet storage, anything like that. These were at this point designated to be sold to the public because they weren't selling them to fleet customers at this point.
Yes.
And every dealership that I've been to have had designations. They've had a retail lot and they've had a separate lot for their fleet customers. I don't know if this is a law. North Carolina, every state's going to be dictated in a different way. I don't know. Whenever you were doing any kind of fleet sales or anything like that, did you have to have separate lots on your dealerships?
Literally, I worked with brands that we didn't have a strong fleet presence. So
you did a lot of luxury, right?
I did a lot of luxury, and my first real foray into the business was with Datsun, then they became Nissan. Yeah. We did do some fleet vehicles, some cab chassis vehicles, where we could get a body manufacturer. Reading was one, so we could do work trucks and things like that, stake body beds, things of that nature. But those were more one-ofs than anything else. We never, other than this one exterminating company, I don't recall ever ordering like more than 3 of a particular type of cab chassis for any one customer. So as we got these individual customers, businesses that needed a small cab chassis with a stake bed or whatever it was, we could get our hands on those vehicles, but we never did huge numbers of fleet.
So going back to this North Carolina dealer that is in this tussle with Stellantis, I go to their Ford lots a lot because they are massive, massive volume dealer. This is the same Ford dealership lot that we talked about a week ago.
Yeah.
Where they had to have 3,000, 3,500 vehicles, and half of them were fleet vehicles. This was on Ford. And we drove down the road just a little bit from that Ford dealership, and there was another storage lot, but there were all Ram 1500s sitting there that looked like they were fleet vehicles. So this dealership is even on the Ford side, I can't imagine what kind of issue. I can't even imagine how much their floor plan interest is every single month with all of these F-150s sitting everywhere, because this is not in a massive city and they just have vehicles sitting everywhere. It's a problem. And this is not going to be the only dealership that's dealing with the same thing across the country right now.
And even if it was in a massive city, you still don't need the volume of fleet vehicles sitting around that these stores have. And I don't know. I'm of the opinion that if you're going to do fleet stuff, you only order what's sold. Like there's too. I mean, how can you have 2,500 vehicles designated for fleet sitting around? and have to pay floor plan interest on that. I mean, why would you even do that? And here I sit, quasi-retired, going, well, to me, it doesn't make good financial sense. Apparently, it makes good financial sense to the owner of the dealerships to do that, but I don't know how. I don't, if you were to look at the numbers, I don't know how you could ever look at the numbers and go, yeah, it makes sense for us to sit on these for 8, 10, 12 months at a time and pay for them.
I almost wonder if, okay, we have all these production problems 3.5 years ago. So this Ford dealership ordered a ton of them. They were able to sell everything. Then they ordered a ton, able to sell everything. They ordered a ton, able to sell everything. And then this last time they ordered a ton of them. Uh-oh. And there's just nobody there to pick it up. And it's just like, okay, well, we were doing all this and we were doing fine. And then just all of a sudden, it seems like what the whole car market did is just like you flip a switch, and then there's just no buyers below the spigot, and you still have it turned up as high as possible. That's a backup problem if I've ever seen one.
Well, and it's certainly not a problem that I would want to be tasked with having to solve. So good for those dealers that are in that position, and for those managers who are tasked with figuring it out. God bless them. I don't know what they're going to do, but there, as I like to say, there's no such thing as an old unsold new vehicle. It will either get sold at auction and somebody will buy it at a huge discount there, or it will get ultimately sold to a retail customer and they will buy it at a huge discount. But ultimately, every one of these vehicles will get sold to somebody. Don't know when, don't know how long it'll take, but ultimately, every last one of them will find a new home and be parked in somebody else's driveway instead of the dealerships.
And I would imagine every single one of those trucks is going to be under invoice, and there's no level of creative F&I fees or whatever that.
Especially, when it comes to fleet, a lot of those are they get their own financing. They just stroke you the check. So yeah, there's not going to be F&I redemption on those deals. No,
there's just no money to be made. I mean, like no wonder these Stellantis dealers are trying to get out from under these fleet vehicles if they have them right now. Because those were 2022s and 2023s. So they got 2024s that came in last year, and now we've got 2025s coming in right now. Oh my goodness, that's a nightmare situation. I'm so glad that I don't own a Stellantis dealership, even though I've been trying to get one for years.
Well, you should find somebody that's willing to give you one. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. Tell every living person you know that they need to subscribe to Car Sense with Brandon and Ray.